May 5th, 1945, 04 o'clock at hours. The Austrian Alps. The air smells of pine and gunpowder and something older, stone, cold, centuries of stone. A castle sits on a hill in the dark. It has sat on that hill since the 13th century. It has seen plagues and famines and armies passing through valleys far below. It has outlasted everything. Tonight it is about to be tested again. Inside its walls, 14 American soldiers, 11 Wehrmacht Germans, 1 SS officer who defected to the other side, a handful of Austrian resistance fighters, and some of the most famous names in French political history, former prime ministers, generals, a tennis champion, and the sister of Charles de Gaulle, all of them holding rifles they had picked up from the floor of cells they had occupied as prisoners. Outside its walls, 150 Waffen SS soldiers, machine guns, anti-tank weapons, absolute fanatical conviction that the war is not yet over, that the Führer's orders still stand, that these prisoners must not reach Allied hands alive. The war in Europe officially ends in 72 hours. Nobody inside those walls knows that. The Sherman tank at the castle gate, the crew has named it Besotten Jenny, is the only armor between the defenders and the SS assault that begins at 0400. The machine gun opens up. The tracers cut through the alpine dark. And 14 American soldiers and 11 German Wehrmacht soldiers load their weapons and take their positions on the same walls. This is the strangest battle in the history of the Second World War. It is also, in some ways, the most human. To understand what happened at Castle Itter on May 5th, 1945, you must understand what the castle was and who was inside it. Schloss Itter, medieval fortress, Tyrolean Alps, Austria. Perched on a limestone outcrop above the village of Itter, 75 kilometers east of Innsbruck. 700 years old, the kind of structure that looks painted against the mountains behind it. Too perfect, too ancient, a fairy tale illustration made in stone. In 1943, the SS made it a prison. Not a death camp, not a labor camp, something more specific and more cynical. A high-value detention facility for French political prisoners the Nazi regime considered useful as potential negotiating assets. Important enough to keep alive, too dangerous to leave free. The prisoners at Castle Itter were not ordinary men. Édouard Daladier, former Prime Minister of France, the man who signed the Munich Agreement in 1938, the agreement that gave Hitler the Sudetenland and gave Europe 18 months of borrowed peace. Arrested by Vichy France in 1940, transferred to SS custody in 1943. Paul Reynaud, also a former Prime Minister, Daladier's successor, the man who had called Winston Churchill on June 10, 1940, as German forces closed on Paris and asked if Britain would fight on alone. Churchill said yes. France surrendered 3 weeks later. Reynaud was arrested before he could flee. He had spent 5 years in Nazi custody. General Maurice Gangl, Commander-in-Chief of Allied forces during the Battle of France in 1940, the general whose defensive strategy had failed catastrophically when German armor came through the Ardennes. He had been a prisoner since his own government arrested him in 1940, 72 years old now, white-haired, still carrying himself like a man who expected to be obeyed. General Maxime Weygand, Gamelin's replacement in 1940. He had ordered the French army to cease resistance. He had been trying to flee to North Africa when the SS caught him in 1942. Michel Clemenceau, son of Georges Clemenceau, the Tiger, the man who had saved France in the First World War. An activist, a former politician, imprisoned for his resistance sympathies. Marie-Agnès Caillot, the sister of Charles de Gaulle, arrested by the Gestapo in 1943 for resistance activities. She had spent 2 years in camps before arriving at Castle Itter. Her brother was at that moment commanding the Free French forces that were, among other things, trying to end the war that had imprisoned her. Jean Barotra, four-time Grand Slam tennis champion, one of the famous Four Musketeers of French tennis in the 1920s and 30s. He had served in the Vichy government briefly before becoming involved in resistance activities. He was 56 years old and still built like an athlete. This detail will matter. These were the prisoners. They had adequate food. They occupied rooms that had been hotel suites before the war. They were permitted to walk within the compound. They were not tortured. They were kept. But as April 1945 turned the corner, and Allied armies pushed into Austria from the west and the south and the east, something shifted in the castle's atmosphere. Their guards began to disappear, quietly. One night there was a full complement of SS personnel. The next morning there were fewer, then fewer still. The prisoners understood what this meant. They understood it the way men understand things that they cannot say aloud, because saying them aloud makes them real. If the SS abandoned them with the castle unguarded, the fanatical units still roaming the mountains would come. Not to take them prisoner. The war was ending. Prisoners had no more value. What fanatics do with prisoners who have no more value is not complicated. They needed to find the Americans. May 3rd, 1945. The castle commander, Sebastian Wimmer, is still present, but he is not a true believer. He is a man who has read the situation correctly and is trying to figure out how to survive the next 2 weeks. He makes a decision that is, in its way, remarkable. He approaches Zvonimir Kuchkovic. Kuchkovic is a Yugoslav communist resistance member who has been working as a handyman at the castle, sent from Dachau as forced labor. He is not a prisoner in the VIP sense. He is a worker. He moves through the castle's service areas, fixes what breaks, knows every hallway. Wimmer gives him a letter written in English. The letter asks for American assistance. It explains the castle's location. It explains who is being held there. Wimmer is not acting out of heroism. He is acting out of self-preservation. He wants an American officer to find this castle, take custody of these prisoners, and in doing so establish that Sebastian Wimmer cooperated with the Allies. It is the calculation of a man who knows which way the tide is running. Kuchkovic takes the letter. He takes a bicycle. He rides into the mountains. The roads are chaos. Wehrmacht columns retreating. SS units still moving forward, still enforcing discipline, still shooting at windows where white flags hang. Kuchkovic navigates between them. A Yugoslav handyman on a bicycle, carrying a letter in English, riding through the last days of the Third Reich. He reaches Innsbruck. He finds American troops. He gives them the letter. The American officer reads it. He understands its significance. He also understands that Castle Itter is outside his division's sector. It is not his jurisdiction. He has orders to stay in his operational area. He sends a small rescue group anyway, in defiance of those orders. The group encounters SS resistance on the road and cannot break through. The castle is not yet reached. Back at Itter, nobody knows Kuchkovic succeeded. Nobody knows a rescue attempt was made and failed. The prisoners wait. The guards thin further. The mountain silence around them grows heavier. The cook decides to try. Andreas Krobot is a Czech. He has been forced labor at Castle Itter, the cook. He is not a soldier. He is not a resistance fighter. He is a man who makes food for prisoners and has no particular reason to risk his life for the French politicians whose meals he prepares. He volunteers anyway. May 4th, 1945. He takes a bicycle. He rides toward Vrgl, a town 3 miles from Itter, hoping to find either Americans or someone who can reach Americans. Vrgl is in a strange state. Wehrmacht forces have recently withdrawn from it. Waffen SS units have moved in, filling the vacuum with the specific cruelty of men who know they have lost, but refuse to acknowledge it. They are shooting at windows with white flags. They are looking for deserters. They are doing what fanatics do in the last hours of a lost cause. Krobot is nearly caught by a patrol. A hand reaches out from a doorway and pulls him inside. The hand belongs to a member of the Austrian resistance. The Austrian resistance in Gangl is led by Alois Meyer. But the most significant figure Krobot is brought to is not Meyer. It is a Wehrmacht major named Josef Gangl. Josef Gangl, born 1910, career soldier. He has fought from the opening of the war through North Africa, through Stalingrad, through Normandy, through the Ardennes. He has served the Wehrmacht faithfully for 6 years. He has been decorated. He holds the German cross in gold. And somewhere along the way, he has stopped believing. It is impossible to know the exact moment. These conversions do not happen in a single instant. They happen in accumulations. A particular village, a particular order, a particular report that cannot be squared with anything a man believed when he signed up to serve. Gangl had arrived at his conversion sometime in late 1944. He had made contact with the Austrian resistance. He had been providing them with intelligence and weapons from Wehrmacht stockpiles. When his unit received orders to retreat, he refused to execute those orders fully. He kept his men in Gangl. His stated reason was that he wanted to protect local civilians from SS reprisals. The SS were executing men found in homes that had hung white flags. Gangl interposed his unit between the SS and the population. This is an extraordinary thing for a Wehrmacht officer to do in May 1945. It is also an extraordinarily dangerous one. The SS did not recognize the Wehrmacht's authority over their activities. Gangl was holding a position against forces that were, on paper, on the same side. When Krobot is brought to him and explains the situation at Castle Itter, Gangl understands immediately. The French prisoners will be murdered if the SS reaches them before the Americans. He has 20 men. He cannot defend a castle against an SS assault with 20 men. He needs Americans. He makes his decision. He gets in a vehicle. He drives toward the sound of American armor. He drives through country held by forces that would shoot him for what he is doing. He reaches Kufstein, 13 kilometers away. He sees Sherman tanks. He stops the vehicle. He gets out. He raises his hands. Captain John Kerry Lee Jr. is 26 years old. He is from Norwich, New York. He played football before the war, a fact that says something about his physical confidence, his comfort with controlled aggression, his ability to operate in conditions where the next impact is always coming, and the question is only where from. He commands the 23rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division. His tank is named Besotten Jenny. The name is a soldier's joke, a mangling of the German word for drunk, besoffen, into something that sounds almost like a woman's name. Soldiers name their tanks the way sailors name their ships. It is a way of making the machine intimate, of acknowledging that you trust your life to it. Lee is waiting in Kufstein to be relieved by the 36th Infantry Division. His unit has been fighting for days. They are tired. They are not expecting additional combat operations. A German major in Wehrmacht uniform walks up to his position with his hands in the air. Lee's men level their weapons. Gangl, still in his major's uniform, still wearing his decorations, still carrying himself with the posture of a career officer, is brought to Lee. He speaks through an interpreter. He explains Castle Itter, the prisoners, their identities, the SS units in the area, the castle's position. Lee listens. He makes a decision in the time it takes most men to finish a sentence. He will go. He leaves one tank to guard the crossing point. He leaves men he cannot spare because he is already short of men. He takes Besotten Jenny, 14 American soldiers, and Gangl with 10 of his Wehrmacht artillerymen. An American officer and a German major ride together in the same column toward a medieval castle in the Austrian Alps. 6 kilometers from the castle, they encounter an SS roadblock. They break through it. They arrive at Castle Itter at dusk on May 4th. The French prisoners come out to meet them. The welcome is warm. The relief is visible on faces that have spent 5 years in captivity calculating survival odds. And then the prisoners look at Lee's force. 14 Americans, 1 Sherman tank, 11 Germans, and their relief acquires a complicated expression. This is all that came. Lee assesses the castle's defenses. He positions his men. He puts Besotten Jenny at the main gate. He assigns sectors. He tells the French prisoners to stay inside. They listen politely. They then go find the weapons the departing guards left behind and take up positions on the walls. The night comes down over the Austrian Alps. Inside Castle Itter, the night of May 4th to May 5th, the composition of the defending force is something that no wargame planner, no military historian, no novelist working in the genre of military fiction would have been willing to put on paper as plausible. Lee, American, 26 years old, tank commander. Gangl, German Wehrmacht, major, decorated veteran of 6 years of war, now fighting against his own country's remaining loyalists. Kurt Siegfried Schrader, Waffen SS officer. He had been convalescing near Itter from wounds received in earlier fighting. The French prisoners had come to know him during his convalescence. They trusted him. They had asked him to take charge of their defense before Lee arrived. He is now defending French prisoners against an assault by fellow SS troops. Hans Waltel, 17 years old, Austrian resistance, a teenager who drove to the castle in answer to Gangl's phone call for help. 2 additional Wehrmacht soldiers. The French prisoners themselves, former prime ministers with MP-40 submachine guns, a general in his 70s who has not fired a weapon in years, the sister of Charles de Gaulle behind a window with a rifle, and Jean Barotra, 56 years old, former Grand Slam champion, still fast, still built with the coiled athletic efficiency of a man who has spent his life reading situations and reacting before his opponents can. The night is probed. SS reconnaissance elements test the walls. They look for gaps. They assess the fire positions. They are not yet ready for the main assault. They are counting defenders, measuring response times, noting where the machine gun on Besotten Jenny can reach and where it cannot. The defenders fire back. Gangl calls Alois Meyer in Vorgl on the castle telephone. He needs reinforcements. Meyer tells him the situation. 2 more Wehrmacht soldiers in Waltel are all that can be spared. They will come. Lee tells the French prisoners again to take cover inside. Paul Reynaud, former prime minister, 76 years old, 5 years a prisoner, stands at a window with his submachine gun and says nothing. He does not go inside. At 0400 on May 5th, the main assault begins. The first sound is a German MG-42. If you have heard an MG-42 fire, you do not forget it. It fires at 1,200 rounds per minute, a sound less like individual shots than like tearing fabric, a continuous rip of mechanical violence. It is the sound of a weapon designed to suppress everything within its arc of fire instantly. It opens up on the gatehouse. Besotten Jenny answers. The 50 caliber machine gun on the Sherman's turret is slower, heavier, each round individually distinct, but it is devastatingly effective at the ranges involved. Tracer rounds cut through the alpine dark in both directions. The SS are carrying grappling hooks. They plan to go over the walls. The defenders on the upper floors see them moving up the slopes below and pour fire down on them. Gangl's Wehrmacht men, artillerymen, not infantry, men trained to serve guns rather than carry rifles, are firing from positions they have taken up on the castle's upper levels. Schrader and his defected SS officers' knowledge of SS tactics is telling them where the assault elements will try to go next. The castle shakes. An 88mm anti-tank round hits the exterior wall. Stone fragments cascade. One piece strikes Schrader's wife, who has taken shelter inside with the prisoners, in the shoulder. She is wounded. She does not leave the castle. There is nowhere safer to go. Inside the den, the French prisoners fight. Reynaud fires his MP-40 through a window. His target, what he can see of the alpine slope below in the gray morning light, is a silhouette moving. He fires at silhouettes. Gamelin, 72 years old, former Supreme Commander. He is behind a wall with a rifle, doing what he is told by an American lieutenant half his age, and following those orders with the discipline of a man who understands military hierarchy, even when the hierarchy has been turned completely upside down. Then Renaud moves. He steps toward a more exposed position. Perhaps he can see better from there. Perhaps the logic of a man who has spent 5 years confined to small spaces, telling him to take the open position when it presents itself. Perhaps he simply does not fully calculate the sniper's line of sight. Gangl sees him move. Gangl runs. He crosses the space between them. He reaches Renaud. He begins to pull the older man back toward cover. The sniper fires. The round is a 7.92 by 57 millimeter Mauser cartridge, standard German caliber, the same ammunition used by German forces on every front of the war for 6 years. The round that kills Gangl is German ammunition. It is the last German ammunition that will matter in this war. Gangl falls. He is the only defender who dies in the Battle of Castle Itter. A Wehrmacht major who defected from his own army, who raised his hands to an American captain in a village 13 kilometers away, who fought beside the men he had been surrendering to, dies protecting a French prime minister from an SS sniper's bullet. There is no category in any military manual for what Josef Gangl did on May 5, 1945. The war does not have language for it. He was not a traitor. He was not a hero in any conventional military sense. He was a man who looked at what his institution had become and chose, at the cost of everything, not to be part of it anymore. He is the sole defender to die. Around him, the battle continues. Besotten Jenny takes a hit. The 88 millimeter round doesn't penetrate the tank's armor fully, but it damages the track. The tank cannot move. Its main gun still works. Its machine gun still works, but it is now a fixed defensive emplacement rather than a mobile asset. The radio is destroyed in the same engagement. Lee cannot reach his division headquarters. He cannot call for the reinforcements that were supposed to be coming. He doesn't know if they are coming. He doesn't know if anyone knows the castle is under assault. He finds the castle's telephone. He calls the Austrian resistance in Wehrmacht. He tells them they need immediate assistance. He tells them the situation. He asks them to relay to the American 142nd Infantry Regiment, which he knows is in the area. He gets through. He asks for reinforcements. The line goes dead. An SS round has cut the telephone cable outside the castle walls. Lee does not know if the message was received. He does not know if help is coming. He does not know if the 142nd heard him before the line went. What he knows is that ammunition is running low. He begins pulling defenders back from the outer walls, concentrating them in the keep. The castle's medieval architecture, thick stone, narrow approaches, limited fields of fire, is now an asset. An SS assault will have to come through choke points. Choke points can be held longer with fewer men, but not indefinitely. It is Jean Barotra who makes the proposal. He comes to Lee. He is 56 years old. He was Wimbledon champion in 1924. He was French Open champion 4 times. He was known for playing in a beret, for his acrobatic movement on the court, for covering ground that opponents assumed he could not reach. He tells Lee he will go over the wall. He tells Lee he is fast enough to get through the SS cordon below the castle and reach Wehrmacht, where he can guide the relief column to the castle directly. Lee looks at him. Lee has few options. He agrees. Barotra goes over the castle wall. He runs. He is 56 years old, running through an Austrian alpine village in the middle of an SS assault, dodging through cover, using the terrain the way an athlete uses a court, reading it, anticipating the angles, moving to where he needs to be before his opponents can close off the space. He reaches Wehrmacht. In Wehrmacht, there is a French-Canadian war correspondent named René Levesque. He is embedded with American forces, covering the war's final days for the Office of War Information. He recognizes Barotra immediately. René Lévesque will later become Premier of Quebec. In 1945, he is 22 years old, watching a famous tennis player arrive at a run from the direction of the gunfire in the hills. Barotra tells him about the castle. Lévesque tells the American officers. The relief column moves. Inside the castle, they are close. Ammunition is nearly gone. Gangl is dead. Several Wehrmacht soldiers are wounded. The SS have been pushing the assault for 12 hours. The castle walls have absorbed artillery fire. Some sections of the outer perimeter are no longer tenable. Lee has pulled everyone to the keep. The last defenders of Castle Itter, American, German, French, Austrian, are holding a medieval interior against a 20th century assault and running out of time in real, measurable units. Then the sound changes. The sound of an MG-42 firing stops being the sound of the enemy and becomes the sound of something else. American M4 Sherman tanks carry 50 caliber machine guns that sound different from MG-42s. If you have spent 12 hours listening to both, you know the difference. You feel it before you consciously identify it. The new machine gun fire is coming from outside the castle. But it is not aimed at the castle. The 142nd Infantry Regiment has arrived. 3 Sherman tanks, infantry support. They come down the road from Vorgl, and they hit the SS assault from behind and from the flank simultaneously. The SS formation, which has been focused on the castle's walls, which has its back to the road, cannot reorient fast enough. The battle turns in minutes. The SS breaks, some are captured, some retreat into the mountain forests. Approximately 100 SS prisoners are taken in the aftermath. The guns stop. The castle is silent. The silence after 12 hours of continuous fire is not peaceful. It is its own kind of violence. The absence of sound so complete that it has physical weight. Lee walks out of the keep. The French prisoners come out behind him. The last thing they see as they step into the alpine morning light is besotted Jenny, immobile, track broken, scorched from the 88mm hit, still sitting at the gate where Lee had positioned her the previous evening. The tank that held the entrance for 12 hours is not going anywhere, but the entrance held. The French VIPs are evacuated that evening. They reach Paris on May 10th. Germany signs its unconditional surrender on May 7th. The war in Europe is over. The accounting, when it comes, is brief and strange. 1 man died defending Castle Itter. Josef Gangl, Wehrmacht major, Austrian resistance member, the sole fatality among the defenders in a 12-hour battle involving anti-tank guns, machine guns, and a force of 100 to 150 SS assault troops. 4 others were wounded. Lee is promoted to captain. He receives the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest American military decoration for battlefield heroism. The citation describes his actions in dry operational language that cannot fully contain what actually happened. He returns home. He dies in 1973. He is buried in Norwich, New York. Gangl is posthumously declared a hero of the Austrian resistance. A street in Vorgl is named after him. There is a small memorial. His name is on a plaque. A street is a good thing to have named after you. It is not sufficient for what he did. But history is not always proportionate in its recognitions. Schrader, the defected SS officer who had been asked by the French prisoners to lead their defense, returns to civilian life. His family had sheltered inside the castle during the assault. They survived. Jean Barotra, the tennis player who vaulted the wall and ran through the SS cordon at age 56, returns to France. He lives to 1994. He is 95 years old when he dies, and he has spent the intervening 50 years as one of the more remarkable footnotes in a war full of them. Paul Reynaud, the former Prime Minister Gangl died saving, returns to French political life. He serves in government again. He lives to 1966. He never forgets the German major who ran toward him instead of away. Castle Itter is privately owned. It is not open to the public. There is no monument at the site of the battle. The castle itself is, as one historian noted, its own monument. Here is what makes the Battle of Castle Itter resistant to the categories we use to understand wars. Wars are supposed to have sides, clean sides. You wear this uniform, you fight for this flag, you are the enemy of everyone wearing that uniform and that flag. The of uniform and flag is what makes it possible for armies to function. To fire at the approaching figure without the cognitive paralysis of individual moral assessment in every moment. Castle Itter destroyed that clarity completely. The Americans inside the castle walls had been in Europe since 1944, fighting Germans. The Wehrmacht men inside the castle walls had been fighting Americans since 1944. They had been trying to kill each other. On May 5, 1945, they loaded weapons side by side and pointed those weapons at SS troops who were, by the technical definition of uniform and flag, on the same side as the Wehrmacht soldiers. And the SS troops outside the walls were, by the technical definition, fighting to execute prisoners who included both friends and enemies of France. Daladier, who had appeased Hitler, and Reynaud, who had resisted him, stood behind the same wall holding weapons with the same purpose. None of the categories applied. What remained when the categories were stripped away was something simpler and harder to name. Gangl and his men had a choice in the final days of the war. The war was lost. Germany was finished. The question was not whether to fight, but what to fight for in the remaining hours before the shooting stopped. They could have retreated. They could have melted into civilian life and waited for the surrender. They could have done what the institution they served had been demanding of them for 6 years and followed orders. They chose something else. They chose the people in the castle over the institution that had imprisoned them. They chose the men and women who happened to be in front of them over the ideology that had sent them to war. They chose to die, one of them did die, for a French former prime minister they had met 36 hours earlier. This is not heroism in the textbook sense. It is something stranger and more durable. It is the moment when a man looks at everything his institution has become and says, "Not this, not here, not today." That moment has no name in any military manual, but every war in history has produced versions of it. Men who, at the last possible moment, found that their actual loyalties ran counter to their official ones, and who acted on the actual ones. The cost, in Gangl's case, was his life. The result was that Paul Reynaud lived to go home. The Battle of Castle Itter lasted approximately 12 hours. It involved, at its peak, perhaps 40 defenders against 150 attackers. Its strategic significance in the context of the entire war is essentially zero. The war ended 3 days later, regardless of its outcome. The prisoners would have been reached by American forces within days, whether or not the castle had been defended. This is the part of the story that makes it permanently interesting. It mattered to no one's war plan. It mattered enormously to the people inside it. Military history tends to be written at the level of operations and campaigns. The movements of divisions and armies, the decisions of generals, the calculations of strategic significance. Those things matter. They shape the world. But Castle Itter happened at the level of individual choice. A handyman got on a bicycle. A cook volunteered to ride into SS-controlled territory. A German major raised his hands and then turned around. An American lieutenant said yes without waiting for authorization. A tennis player went over a wall. Each decision was made individually, without certainty of outcome, by people who could see only a small piece of the situation they were in. None of them knew whether the handyman would reach American lines. None of them knew whether the cook would be caught by the SS patrol. Gangl did not know whether Lee would take him seriously. Lee did not know whether reinforcements would come. Barotra did not know whether the line was down or whether anyone had heard Lee's message. They acted without knowing. This is a different kind of military lesson than the ones taught in academies. The lesson is not about strategy or logistics or force composition. It is about what people do when the institution has collapsed around them, and the only thing left is the choice in front of them. The institution of the German Wehrmacht had asked Gangl to do many things over 6 years. Most of them he did. Somewhere in 1944, he started asking a question about those things that the institution could not answer. The question was not complicated. It was, what is this for? The answer he eventually arrived at, standing in Vorgl in May 1945, with the war ending around him, was that the only thing worth doing in the time remaining was to protect the people directly in front of him from the worst of what was coming. He didn't need orders for that. He didn't need authorization. He didn't need a chain of command or a field manual or a regimental history to tell him what the right thing was. He needed a bicycle. He needed a German major who would drive toward the Americans instead of away from them. He needed an American lieutenant who would say yes before the paperwork caught up. They found each other in the last days of a war that had killed tens of millions. One of them died. All of them were right. The principle that lives inside this story, beneath the medieval castle, in the Alpine morning, in the Sherman tank at the gate, is not complicated. The enemy is not always across the line. The ally is not always on the same side. What matters, what has always mattered in every institution that has ever asked human beings to commit violence in its name, is whether the person next to you is the right thing. On May 5th, 1945, 14 American soldiers and 11 German Wehrmacht men and one defected SS officer and a handful of Austrian teenagers and a group of elderly French politicians decided, without a single shared language, without a common flag, without any formal alliance or treaty or order that covered this specific situation, that the right thing was to hold the castle walls until the relief column arrived. They held them. Josef Gangl is buried in Tyrol. His street is in Vorgl. The castle is still on the hill. The question it asks has not changed. When everything collapses, when the institution, the flag, the ideology, the chain of command, all of it fails or reveals itself to be something you cannot serve, what do you actually fight for? Gangl's answer cost him everything. It is still the clearest answer the Battle of Castle Itter produced.